He is the Bellator CEO coming off from arguably one of their biggest shows at Bellator 120, live on Submission Radio. We have Bjorn Rebney. Bjorn, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Bjorn. And let's jump right into it. Now, you're coming off one of Bellator's biggest shows, Bellator 120. It's been a few days now. How are you feeling about the big pay-per-view event?
I'm still riding the high. I'm still feeling the same kind of energy, the same kind of goosebumps I had that night. We had the perfect combination. It was a perfect storm. Great fights, great competition, a little bit of soap opera, great entertainment, memorable moments. It had all the pieces that I hoped it would have. I was stoked about it then. I'm excited about it now. I always try to come off the high a little bit and 24, 48 hours later look back on it and say to myself, was it as good as I thought it was? And it was. It was a great event. I'm still excited about it, and we had a really, really good night.
Yeah, I would agree. It was a really fun night, and like any good pay-per-view, the next day there was something to talk about. But going back a little bit, the injury bug, we hate him. As the head of, one of the biggest MMA companies in the world, tell us what goes through your head when the main event of your first pay-per-view gets thrown out the window.
Well, look, two things. One, I had always promoted this, and from a promotional and advertising marketing perspective, I had always promoted it as having two main events because I thought Rampage versus Mo had a huge amount of buzz behind it, as did Alvarez Chandler 3, the trilogy fight. So we had an incredible main event to step into that sole position. And then, of course, we had Chandler stay on the card versus Will Brooks. We had all the different pieces in place. Tito in a really interesting, wacko kind of fight against Alexander Shlemenko, etc. You never like getting those calls, but to have as many big fights as we had on that card and to only get one call, honestly, is not the end of the world. I mean, you expect that you're going to lose somebody. Ed was the only person we lost, and we'll get to see that trilogy fight at some point coming up in the future. So it wasn't a good call. In a perfect world, we'd all like to be taller, better looking, have nicer hair, and never get an injury call, but that doesn't happen. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, I wish we were taller and better good looking, that's for sure. But obviously with the first pay-per-view, it ended up being a free card. Was there any thoughts about doing this one as a free card, or, because you had the two main events, you just, roll on straight away?
Yeah, never gave a consideration to it. I mean, look, November 2nd was a much different show. That had a lot of spike-worthy fights on it, but without that, with having happened what happened with Cage and Tito, it gave me the context to pause, to wait, to think, and I think the spike move was the right move back then in November. This card was just too packed. I mean, from the moment it kicked off, from Michael Page versus Ricky Rainey, and then moving into the heavyweight tournament championship, and then Tito in a comeback fight that no one knew what to expect, where the odds were 6-1, Shlemenko was a favorite. That had must-see weirdness written all over it. And then the Chandler fight against Brooks, which was just, I knew was going to be epic, and no one else really understood how epic it was going to be because they didn't understand how talented Will Brooks really is. And then obviously with Rampage coming off of 2 first-round knockouts versus King Mo having had the best camp he'd ever had, I just knew we had a pay-per-view card, and I knew that it should remain on pay-per-view and set the table. So it never crossed my mind.
Now, Bjorn, obviously a lot of people really enjoyed Bellator 120. They enjoyed the big card feel, the big event feel. It was really a spectacular spectacle. But what everybody's wondering now is, will you be trying to do more of these pay-per-views in the future and building up a card over a month's time rather than a lot of the other Bellator pay-per-views that aren't built up just as much?
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll do more pay-per-view, but we're not going to ever be the UFC. We're never going to do a pay-per-view every 2.5, 3 weeks, whether it's good or not good. We're never going to force-feed premium content on people and ask for, $39 or $49 or $45 or $35 from them unless I feel when I look at the card that it's got huge value to it and it's got big fights and it's warranted to be a premium event. This one was, and we probably will be doing another one sometime over the next 6 or 9 months, but they'll be few and far between. They're going to be the best of the best, and we're going to continue to work with Spike, literally the worldwide leader in MMA content production and promotion and distribution. We're going to keep working with Spike, doing 25 shows a year that build those stars out to fuel those 2 or maybe 3 big pay-per-views per year. But we're we're not going to turn into the animal that consistently relies on pay-per-view, because it's just not, you want them to be big, you want them to be special, you want them to have big storylines, and that's the key to success in that market.
Yeah, and you did mention that UFC has a few pay-per-views that might not have the biggest cards, and do you think that is one of the criticisms of the UFC? There are a few pay-per-views there where the cards aren't stacked as high as they should be.
Yeah, look, I've never hidden the fact that, I've been an MMA fan for 2 decades. I used to watch Pride years ago when no one had any idea what it was. And I've watched jungle fights out of Brazil, and I've watched all the different organizations. And I used to watch the UFC before UFC ever transitioned to Spike TV here in the domestic U.S. But there was a time when they had great pay-per-views, and the pay-per-views were big events. And now what it feels like to me is it feels like just a repetition. It's like whether it's a big event or a small event, or whether it's got great fights or mediocre fights, it's always there. And the expectation is always that people should pay for it. And I think that when you're asking people to dig into their pocket for hard-earned dollars, whether it's $35 or $45 or $55, you should be providing entertainment to them that really warrants that kind of a premium purchase. And I think that, part of the reason that the UFC has experienced a real downturn in their average pay-per-view buy rates is that that's not happening the way that it used to. So as we looked at it as a company, and as we talked to our partners at Spike and at Viacom, we said, look, we'll do pay-per-views, but we'll do pay-per-views when we think they're warranted and when fans think they're warranted, and we'll do them few and far between. There'll be something special. And the rest of the time, we'll give great fights to folks for free on Spike TV and to the 140 countries around the world where our shows are distributed. But I think that's a pretty substantial point of difference between us and the other group.
I would agree. Also, going back to Bellator 120, in any business, even in regards to Submission Radio, we're always celebrating the little victories. Looking for ways to improve in the future. In terms of the pay-per-view, what would you say was the best thing about it, and what would you look to improve on in the future?
Well, I think the best thing about the pay-per-view that we had last Saturday night was that the fights delivered. And look, you can spend a ton of money producing the show, and you can promote and market it, and you can produce great feature pieces and stories behind the fighters, and you can do all the different bells and whistles. But if the fights aren't great, and if the combat's not compelling, it doesn't matter how good all the rest of it is. So I think the number one thing that I look to is that our talent development department did an amazing job developing the Michael Chandlers and the Will Brookses of the world, and we did a great job working hand-in-hand in partnership with Rampage, recrafting him and giving him love for the game again, and getting him back to the Rampage of old, and King Mo had a great camp, and all of those pieces worked. So the fights were compelling. The odds makers had Tito as a 6-1 underdog. They had Will Brooks as a 7-1 underdog. Both of those guys ended up, pulling off what some people thought were amazing upsets. I thought were expected performances. So that's what really makes it work. That's what really makes it sing. I think in terms of improvement and things that I might do differently, pacing-wise, looking at the show now 6 or 7 times, we're always trying to force as much water through the fire hose as we can when we do our shows on a weekly basis on Spike. We're trying to put as many fights on TV as possible. So we're always rushing. We're always running really fast, trying to make the show have more fights and more fights and more fights. We took a little bit of a break off of that, and we gave more time between fights, told more stories, spent more time doing interviews. I think we may have gone a little too far. I think the pacing was a little bit slow for my taste as a pure fight fan. And that's just a live and learn thing. I mean, the fights when they got in were awesome, but I would probably do it a little bit quicker next time we do it. But those are that's the high water mark, and if I had anything I'd look to improve, it's probably that.
And a lot of fans did mention that, but I think it is a very small part of the pay-per-view criticism. So I think people really did enjoy the event. But speaking of Will Brooks, this is a star coming out of the event. He beat Chandler. He looked great. What were your thoughts, number one, on the judges' scorecards? Because a lot of people thought the scorecards didn't really reflect the fight. What were your thoughts on that? And what do you see in the future for Will?
Well, as I looked at the fight, and then I answered fight night, and when I'm typically asked questions post-fight in the post-fight press conference and in interviews, which go on for hours post-fight, I typically try to kind of play the role of a politician and say, hey, I haven't seen the fight on tape. But that one I watched really clearly. I thought Mike won 1 and 2. on my scorecards, Mike won 1 and 2, no questions asked. Will, on my scorecard, won 3 and 4. I thought going into the 5th and final round, we had a fight that would be won by the guy who won the 5th. And I think that if you know MMA scoring and you're aware of how judges score a fight, it is not based on the most impactful moment that happened in the fight on any given round. It's based on who actually won the round, and the round is a 5-minute expanse of time. As I watched that round, I had Will Brooks winning over 3 minutes and 40 seconds of the round. Now, there's no questions asked. Mike Chandler had Will in a lot of trouble at the end of the fight. That last probably 80 to 90 seconds, Mike won that part of the round. But because you close out a round looking really good doesn't take away from the fact that for that first 3:30 or 3:40 of the round, Will was controlling the action, and if the fight had stopped at 3:30 or 3:40, you'd have to give it to Will. So it's the totality of that 5 minutes in your judging criteria. And so as I looked at that 5th, no doubt Mike had a little bit more of an electrifying moment, but it was just that. It was a minute and a half. It wasn't the 3:30 that preceded it, the 3:30, 3:40, whatever it was. And so I scored that last round for Will Brooks, and I gave him the fight. I think he won the fight 3 rounds to 2, but it was ridiculously close, and it was great. And the future for Will Brooks, absolutely unlimited. This kid is a freak phenom. The athleticism, the explosiveness, the striking, the kicks, the wrestling base, all the pieces of it. He's got incredible drive. I've talked to a lot of his teammates, and they say that nobody in the gym actually works harder than he does. He's the guy who shows up early, leaves late, is always looking to improve every facet of his game. The maturation in this kid's game has been unbelievable. He's got an unlimited future in this game. He could literally be number 1 in the world, and he could be it in shorter order than anyone thought he could.
Absolutely. Will, Noel's right, an amazing fighter. I'm just wondering your thoughts on Mike's performance. A lot of people think that Mike might have overlooked Will a little bit. Maybe, no, but he let Will take his back in a lot of the positioning. What were your thoughts on Mike's performance? Do you think he did overlook Will a little bit coming into this one?
I don't know. Mike is such a fierce competitor. Chandler's as fierce of a competitor as we've got in the game. I think that, look, what we had set up and what Mike was prepping for month after month was really, in my mind, the best trilogy fight in the history of MMA. He was preparing for one specific fighter. Everything was geared toward that fighter. We did 2 30-minute specials on Spike TV specifically about one fighter. It was Ed Alvarez versus Mike Chandler, Mike Chandler versus Ed Alvarez. Everything he was thinking about was him. And so when Mike gets that call 8 days out saying Ed's got a concussion, Ed's out, you're fighting Will, even though Mike's a fantastic warrior, even though Mike responded and said, "I'm in, don't worry, I'll fight, I'm not walking away," the air in the balloon was let out. When you call Will Brooks and you make that call and you go, "Hey, you're not fighting Nate Jolly in a 3, but you're fighting one of the best fighters on the face of the earth, Michael Chandler, one of the greatest lightweights we got in MMA, and by the way, the interim belt's on the line, and by the way, you're going to make twice as much money, et cetera," all the air goes into the balloon. So psychologically, you've got 2 completely different fighter situations, and it's just human nature. I mean, if you're expecting to go to an unbelievable event, to experience something unreal, and somebody calls you right before you're going to go and says, it's not going to be that, and you make a call to somebody else and you go, hey, you're expecting to go to this B-level experience, and suddenly we're going to give you an A++ level experience, and by the way, you're going to make more money, be on a bigger stage, more is going to be at stake, it's going to be awesome, and you're a competitor at heart. Everything, all the air goes into the balloon. So I just think that it's one of those situations. It's just that Mike, no matter how much of a warrior you are, no matter how good of an athlete you are, what you've done, it's hard psychologically to right the ship when that happens to you. And I think we may have seen some of that. Mike's a fierce competitor, but it's just, you can't, it's difficult for any athlete to overcome that kind of a letdown when you're looking forward to fighting, in a fight that, you could make the argument would have determined the best lightweight in the world, or surely one of the top 2.
That's actually a really great breakdown, Bjorn. I wanted to also ask you, obviously, next logical question is, when can we expect Brooks versus Alvarez?
Well, I mean, that's the question. I said it post-fight. Per Ed's agreement, per all the settlement agreement that we had with Ed to make all these fights happen, the next fight in Ed's contract is Michael Chandler. and that's per his agreement with us. So, you know, we're going to have to sit down and we're going to have to talk with Ed and talk with all the relative participants. But, you know, but it could be Chandler Alvarez 3 in the trilogy, and it could be Will Brooks defending the interim belt, you know, against one of our tournament winners. That could be the scenario that ends up unfolding, because contractually Ed is contracted per his settlement to fight Mike in this second fight. So that may end up being the route that we have to go.
You know, as you mentioned, the Tito Shlemenko fight, you know, Tito coming out on top, a huge fan favorite. After that fight, everybody, you know, screaming, yelling. I think, you know, Tito has a place in everybody's heart when they're an MMA fan. But I'm just wondering, what do you think of doing with Tito next? Obviously, he was in the post-fight press conference. He seemed very confident, talked about his injuries all the time, but that's okay. We're used to it. What are you thinking about with Tito next? Are you looking to put him in a spot where he fights a few other guys in the light heavyweight division and possibly give him a shot at the title? Or are you looking to maybe make a fight with Rampage next or something like that?
I don't know. You know what? The dream scenario for somebody who sits in my seat is to have options. That's the best possible case you can be in. Is optionality is a gift from the MMA gods. And right now, at 155 pounds, there's some optionality. At 170 pounds, I've got optionality. At featherweight, I got optionality. And now at 205, I've got optionality. I got Tito, who was all but written off in everyone's book, and who just had this great performance against a world-class champion at 85. And now there's some different roads we can pursue. Now the question now is not, oh, Tito's washed up. The question now is, what did that fight on Saturday prove? And is Tito really back? And now, so we want to step up, and I don't know what exactly we're going to do next. I mean, part of it involves Rampage and what we do next there, and if that next fight is Emmanuel Newton for the world title, and then we got to talk to Tito, and we got to make a determination what's next for Mo, and there's a lot of pieces to that equation, but they all come out of Saturday night having heightened their sense of relevance. So I don't have an answer for you right now, but there are a lot of good options, and that's what you'd be willing to kill for as a promoter to have.
Now, another question, as far as Shlemenko, you know, it was a very interesting fight going obviously up to the light heavyweight division against Tito, and you know, it was a great fight. It was a fun fight. I'd say the only downside is that it broke the long win streak, you know, of the middleweight champion since 2010. Do you think this hurts Shlemenko's star power in any way?
I don't, but I think the problem from a consumer perception standpoint is that so many people were looking at this fight and thinking that Shlemenko was the overwhelming favorite. And what I kept barking about and talking about before the fight was, say what you will, but Tito Ortiz is one of the biggest light heavyweights in the game. He's a guy who is rock solid at 235, who somehow cuts down to 205, and then comes into the cage with dabs at 230 to 235. And Shlemenko is a European middleweight who should probably be fighting at welterweight, who will come into the cage at less than 200 pounds. So you're talking about a monster human being versus a very small middleweight. And I said, you got to keep that in mind. If Tito plays this right, he takes Shlemenko, puts his back up against the cage, brings him down to the mat, and uses that amazing strength and size when they're still dry early in the first to finish the fight. That's what happened. Now, what would have happened if the fight had gone past the first and Shlemenko had been able to keep distance and had been able to stuff takedowns? I think we might have seen a completely different fight. But what I thought could happen is exactly what did happen, and nobody was taking that into account. So when a huge man fights a smaller man, does that take away from what Shlemenko has done at 185? Does it take away from how dominant he's been as a middleweight champion and from the amazing performances he's put on? I don't know. It's a tough question. We're going to have to see how people respond as he gets back into the cage to defend that 85 belt. But don't lose track of the fact he was 35 pounds smaller, 35 pounds smaller than Tito when they went into that cage, and you could see it when they stepped in and after Tito made that glorious entrance. So I don't know. I don't know what it answers about Tito, and I'm not sure how it impacts Shlemenko, but you got to remember, size matters. That's why we have weight divisions in MMA, and that's what made this fight so weird and compelling for me is size actually matters. Featherweights don't fight welterweights. And what you basically had here is you had a big welterweight fighting a big light heavyweight, and the results were what logic would tell you they could have been.
Mm. Another thing I wanted to ask you, obviously, in terms of light heavyweights, one thing that came out from 120 is the uncertainty of Rampage fighting Emmanuel Newton for the title. A big difference between, obviously, UFC and Bellator is the tournament format. Do you think, with Rampage and the uncertainty that he may or may not fight Emmanuel Newton, do you think it's dangerous to sort of do that, given that it might undermine one of the greatest aspects of Bellator, which is the tournament format?
Well, look, I think one of the reasons that we've had such a good relationship with Rampage and that he's excited again about being a mixed martial artist and that he stayed in shape and never got above 230 at camp and has been, driven to get back to be one of the best in the world is we're working with him as a partner. We're not dictating to him. We're not calling him on the phone or having a matchmaker call him and tell him who he's going to fight and if he's injured, telling him he has to fight, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, the best way to approach things with somebody like Page is to continue to approach it as a partnership. So I've got to sit down with him. We've got to go through the dynamics. I would very much like to see Emmanuel versus Quinn Rampage Jackson. It's a fight that he earned vis-a-vis winning the tournament. Newton's one of the best light heavyweights in the world. He doesn't get the credit for it, but he sure deserves the credit for it. And that's a fight I would love to see. But I'm not going to be one that's going to sit here with the big promoter's hat and suit on and say this is what's going to happen, win, lose, or draw. I want to talk to Page about it. I want to sit down with him and hopefully we can get that done.
And just another thing on the tournament format, it's worked really well for you guys for up until now. Is it something that Bellator will be staying with, for the future, or do you see the tournament format, maybe being changed, edited, or even going completely out the window at some point in Bellator's future?
Well, I never see it going out the window. I think the reality is that when I started this company, when I started building it in 2008 and then launched it in 2009, the essence of our point of difference was that we were real sports competition. We weren't guys in a shiny suit deciding who was going to fight who for what and when. We weren't going to hand-pick guys that we thought we could sell to consumers. We were going to let fighters earn it through a tournament. So that's not going anywhere. And that tournament structure gave us Eduardo Dantas, it gave us Pat Kern, it gave us Michael Chandler, it gave us Ed Alvarez, it gave us Alexander Shlemenko, Doug Lima. The list goes on and on. It's recreated, in many people's mind, Quentin Rampage Jackson. It has given him a platform through which, in real short order, he could win seminal fights against good fighters and put himself in position for a world title fight. So that's not going anywhere. Will we make adjustments? Will we make small tweaks? Will we change things ever so slightly to give us a little bit more flexibility? Yeah, we did that with the championship rematch clause. There are some other small changes we're looking at. But at its core, those 8-man and 4-man tournaments are going to stay in play because that's what's allowed us to develop, a collection of the greatest fighters in all of MMA.
Absolutely, and I think it's definitely a very interesting time in Bellator to see what happens in the evolution and all of that. One of the other things we wanted to talk to you about is obviously the Rampage King Mo fight. King Mo came out. He said some things about Bellator. He said some things about you, and some people were just wondering, what's your relationship like with Mo? Where do you see Mo going from here? And did you know that he had these kinds of feelings before the event happened?
Well, I knew that Mo had a lot of pressure on him going into this fight. I mean, look, let's be honest with ourselves. When we signed Mo, coming off of the suspension, the drug suspension, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission suspension, there was a lot of high hope for Mo recreating himself. At the time, we didn't have the depth at the 205 division that we do now, so the expectation, I think, from Mo and from us as well was that he was probably well positioned to capture the title here. Well, it didn't, Mo has gone 4-3 here and lost 3 of his last 6, so it hasn't gone the way he expected. It hasn't gone the way we expected. Now, the caveat to that is Mo lost twice to Emmanuel Newton, and whereas when he lost the first time it was a shock, when he lost the second time everybody said, wow, this Emmanuel Newton is really, really talented. This could be one of the better 205ers in the space. He just faced Rampage Jackson, and Rampage Jackson is back. And he's back to loving the game. He's back to training. We got his knees fixed by the same specialist who fixed Kobe Bryant's knees. So there's no shame in having lost twice to Emmanuel Newton and Rampage. But I think Mo was under a lot of pressure, legacy pressure, position in the space pressure, money pressure, etc. And so that loss obviously was not a good one for him. And I think you saw some of that reaction emotionally post-fight. He was very upset. Now look, I've said it, and oftentimes I step away from saying, here's how I think a fight should have been scored, or I agree or disagree. But a lot of the judges have been interviewed, and I agree with the judges that have been interviewed. I think that, look, I think Mo clearly won the first round with takedowns. I think Rampage clearly won the second round, controlling the fight in the stand-up game and landing more solid punches. And the third was very close. But as I review the third round, and as I've looked at it, now I've watched it multiple times, Mo landed a takedown, and Rampage controlled the fight standing, landed more effective punches, and pressed the action. So I don't have any hesitation saying the same thing that I said post-fight, which was, as I watched the fight, and I've been around a lot of fights, I think Rampage won the fight. So, and I do understand Mo's being upset. I'm obviously not thrilled with his choice of words, and I think he went overboard. But the reality is, I understand how much that was at stake for Mo. I understood and I understand how he thought this was going to be a linchpin moment for him to reestablish himself after those two losses in sequence to Emmanuel Newton, and it didn't work out. And that's got to be a tremendous shock to the system. And his reaction was emotional and powerful, and had a lot of soap opera feel to it, and added a lot of intrigue and a lot of weird emotion to the event. But there was a lot on the line, and it didn't work out. And so I'm not shocked by the reaction.
And have you spoken to Mo since? Obviously, it's been a few days since the event. Have you had a chance to speak with him and see what he's feeling like now?
Well, he and I spoke post-event, because first I wanted to get it, right from the horse's mouth. I wanted to find out what was going on, because I didn't expect it. Because Mo and I have had pretty good communication over the last few years, ever since I signed him, and then I got him to deal with TNA, and we've done a lot of things, and we were doing a lot of things in terms of promotion of the event. So I confronted him backstage. I was like, hey, let's pull away from everybody else, get the microphone away from you, and tell me what the hell's going on. But we haven't had any kind of communication since then, and he's done a lot of interviews. He's still obviously real upset with what he thinks is a bad decision. But he's a competitor, and here's the bottom line with King Mo. I still think that he's a very, very talented fighter. I mean, look, the questions were coming out of Mo's horrible knee injury, where he almost died of staph infection, and the suspensions and the drug allegations and the drug suspensions was, can Mo ever come back to being what he was? If you saw the explosiveness in those takedowns in the first round, where he did win the first round, and you saw the way the support, you saw the explosiveness, you saw the knees, you saw everything working, it answered a lot of questions for me in terms of whether King Mo can ever go back to being that fighter. And I think there's a potential that he can. So I still have a lot of belief that King Mo has a lot of gas in the tank. I think King Mo could potentially do some really explosive things here. And look, this was a very close fight against a Quentin Rampage Jackson, who I believe is fighting at a level very close to the level he was fighting at in some of those most memorable fights we've ever seen with Rampage. So he lost a close fight to an awesome fighter at 205 pounds. So I still believe that Mo can do powerful things, and I think that there's a future for King Mo here. He's got a lot of fights left with us, and I think that we could see him in some big fights.
And Bjorn, just on that fight, obviously with Rampage, towards the the end of his UFC run, he seemed a little bit disinterested. Obviously a big part of that was the UFC. He seems really rejuvenated coming into Bellator, but he's also signed on to other things such as TNA, and there is that possibility of him doing movies. Now with his sort of foot planted in so many things, do you think it'd be tough for Rampage to be the Bellator champ? And do you know if he does want to be the Bellator champ?
Well, I think the pinnacle, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for fighters is that strap, is the world title strap. And I know it's something he and I have talked about many times, so I think he wants it. There are some issues and hurdles in the way of that, just because of the fact that he and Newton share a trainer. And I think, we saw that with Rashad and John, and we've seen it before at the top level in MMA. It just so happens we've also seen it at 205. And I think that's one of the issues that we've got to get through. The advantage that we've got with Paige is that those TV opportunities and the film opportunities, the reality show projects we're working on with our partners at Spike, the film opportunities are all things that we're doing together. So what's not happening is like what happened when he was with the UFC, when he was fighting and then got an incredible opportunity from an outside source to do a film project called The A-Team, which did hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide, and then stepped away from the fight game. So what we're able to do, because of the power and the expanse of Viacom, is to have all of those things working in unison. That's part of what makes this relationship between Bellator, Viacom, Spike so powerful for a fighter, is that we can orchestrate television at the right time. We can do the production at the right time. We can execute a film project and have his shoot time at the right time. And then we can stop those things and put everything in a hold pattern so that he can go train. Or I can call Dixie on the cell phone at TNA and I can say, hey, let's carve out this 70-day period for Rampage to do all these cool things with TNA Impact. Then we want to do a 15-day shoot with Spike for X or Y or Z. Then we need to go back in for 7 weeks uninterrupted for his camp to prep for this fight. So the coordination is all there. And I think what's happened in the past with him is he got an incredible opportunity to do an incredible movie that was wildly successful, and he went and did it, which is what he should have done, because it helps build up the Quinn Rampage Jackson brand and the Q score, but it wasn't coordinated with the promotional company, so they got very upset by it. Well, we've got everything under one umbrella, so we're all working in unison as partners, and I think we'll be able to keep that all coordinated.
Yeah, and Bjorn, I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned Viacom, between you, Spike, and Viacom, you guys are like a superpower, and they are obviously a huge partner of Bellator. I wanted to know how they felt about the pay-per-view, and also a lot of fans wanted to know how many years are left in the contract with them.
Well, with us and Viacom, in terms of the length of the contract, Viacom is now our majority owner. So when I say partner, they're legitimately our partner. They're not. A lot of people in the television business say, "Oh, they're our partner," and they mean it kind of from a floaty, subjective perspective. Viacom is legitimately our partner. They own a majority stake in the company. I used to own the vast majority of stock in Bellator. Now I'm a minority shareholder and am partners with Viacom and am the CEO and chairman of this company. But we're all in it for the very long haul. It's not like a typical TV agreement where you would say, oh, there's 2 or 3 years left on my TV agreement. We're actually business partners together. So when we're thinking and planning and structuring, we're looking 3, 5, 7 years down the road in terms of where we're going, what we're doing, what the next strategic steps are, et cetera. And as an executive producer of television, as a CEO and chairman of a company, that is the ideal position to be in. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Look, when the UFC is dealing with Fox, they're dealing with a complete separate entity. When we're dealing with Viacom and Spike, we're sitting down at our board meetings with our partners. Kevin Kay, who heads Spike TV, is a gentleman I speak to 2-3 times a day, and he sits on the board that I'm the chairman of. So we're literally working hand in hand to make this bigger and better and more entertaining and more consumer and fan friendly. So it's about as good of a relationship as you could hope to have.
And just quickly, something that you guys sort of built on for Bellator was obviously Fox Sports Latino, which is very interesting because obviously even the UFC doesn't have connections with them, and that's obviously as a way to plant the seeds in international markets. How's that going so far?
Oh, it's going awesome. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive to fans to say Bellator is partnered with Fox in Latin America. And we did the largest distribution deal in the history of Latin America with Fox. So if you go to Mexico or Chile or Peru or Brazil or Argentina or Ecuador, the list goes on and on and on, you will see Bellator live and free on Fox Sports. And it covers all of Central America, all of South America, and all of Mexico. It's the largest distribution deal in the history of Latin America for mixed martial arts. And they've been an amazing partner. They've been a spectacular partner. And when we announced it, I think some people thought it was an April Fool's joke because it says, Bellator partners with Fox. But we did it, and they've been an amazing partner for us. They had a live booth at the pay-per-view. They had 3 different reporters on site, 2 calling the fight and 1 roving, and worked hand in hand with us to bring, fans, millions of fans throughout all of Latin America, that great event live. And it went off beautifully. The ratings have been incredible. It's been a great partnership, and it's another 5 years in the making now. We just kicked off the first year, and it's got another 5 years on it. They've been a great partner.
And you're very accurate, Bjorn. It's all about relationships and partnerships. Obviously, the UFC's partnership with Fox, a lot of people put some criticism on that, and not people aren't sure if Fox and UFC are going to go on forward once the contract expires due to some mixed results and ratings. What are your thoughts on the UFC Fox relationship? Do you think there's going to be a relationship that's going to keep on going, or do you think there's a possibility it might end at the end of this contract?
Boy, that's a very, very good question. I know that I think and the articulation has been from UFC management, but they articulated an expectation of success numbers-wise that they have not yet achieved. So it brings up interesting questions. I don't know. My relationship with Fox is with the team down in Latin America, who are apart and distinct and separate from the team in America. Or in North America. But it's difficult to tell. It's never an easy task launching a new network or a new series of networks. There is an awful lot of UFC content out there. Some of it is good, some of it is not so good. And they're having a more difficult time now maintaining higher levels of pay-per-view buy rates on average. Their pay-per-view buy rates have dipped down. So it's difficult to tell. Only time will tell, and ultimately that's a decision that Fox is going to make. Very smart people over there. I'm sure they'll make a good decision. But it's interesting that the conversation comes up, and it's interesting when I get asked about it because you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen, but ultimately we'll see it play itself out.
And speaking of contracts, obviously Nate Diaz, not very happy over at the UFC. They've been wanting to get out of their contracts. More example of fighters who haven't had the best experience with the UFC. Would they be someone that you'd be interested in the future potentially if they can get out of the contracts, or if opportunities presented to you to buy them out of their contracts and get them over to Bellator? Obviously, they're very exciting fighters.
That's always a good question, and whenever I'm on with somebody who knows the MMA space, I typically get that question. It's always a touchy one because from a legal perspective, a person in my position has got to be very careful about how you answer that so that no one can take aim at you for intentionally interfering with an existing contract. To the best of my knowledge, both Nate and Nick have existing contracts with the UFC. The status of those contracts, or whether they're being told, which means put on hold, where they sit, how much time is left, etc., is something I don't know anything about. I can tell you this: Nate and Nick are very exciting. They obviously draw a great deal of interest. People care about them, whether they love them or they hate them. People have an opinion about both Nate and Nick, and they both put on wickedly exciting fights. So as an MMA fan, taking my CEO and chairman's hat off, because it's an important hat for me to take off when I talk about guys like that, I like watching them fight. I think they're exciting and entertaining guys to watch fight, and I like listening to them talk when they're both positive and negative. So who knows? Who knows what the future holds?
Now, in terms of going back to 120 and stars in general, with MMA, it's so funny. Guys that were coming up yesterday are, close to retirement now. It's evolving so fast. In terms of stars, there's a lot of guys coming up in Bellator now. And they're really getting up there with the ranks of the other people who've pioneered MMA. Who would you say is the biggest star in Bellator at the moment?
Wow, it depends. It depends on where you look. Talk about a nice question to have to ponder, because it wasn't that long ago, 3 years ago, where I could have told you exactly who the biggest stars were, because we only had a select group of them. And now you look at it and you say, well, look, is it Pat Curran, because of the amazing run he had and a Fight of the Year candidate against Daniel Strauss, one of the greatest featherweights in MMA, and what he went through and how he came back? Is it Quentin Rampage Jackson for his comeback to the cage, for his love and enthusiasm for the game, and for these 3 back-to-back wins, 2 of which were first-round knockouts? Is even coming off of a loss? Is it a Mike Chandler? Is it an Ed Alvarez? Is it a Will Brooks as a new up-and-coming superstar who showed great athleticism and incredible personality and great drive and an incredible gas tank and a full set of skills? I don't know. Is it Eduardo Dantas, who's a freak of nature at 135? Is it the 39-year-old who's closer to my age than most of the fighters that fight in our cage, Joe Warren, who just beat Rafael Silva, one of the toughest bantamweights in the world, to capture our interim title, who's a monster and who's a huge I don't know. You know, it just talk about, is it Doug Lima? Doug Lima, in my mind, and I'm getting a little deep here, but Doug Lima, in my mind, our welterweight champion, is the most exciting, explosive welterweight in mixed martial arts today. Now, you can argue all day, is he the best welterweight in MMA? And everybody's going to have an opinion. But I will tell you this, there is not a more explosive, more exciting knockout artist at 170 pounds on the face of the earth than Doug Lima. That I will tell you without any question, and I will defend that comment to the death. That guy is an absolute rock star, and he's one of the nicest, most charismatic, cool dudes you'd ever want to meet. Movie star good looks, great personality, and he will kick and knock your head off. So, I don't know. You know, what a great problem to have that I can keep droning on about fighter after fighter who I think might be the biggest guy in the organization.
Now, Bellator, Bjorn, we've got some fan questions for you, but before we jump to the fan questions, I just have one last question for you, and this is about these new gloves that you guys are creating to reduce eye pokes. I just wanted to find out, is there an update on how those gloves are coming along? Because it's kind of hard to imagine a glove that could do that. If you know anything about it, please let us know. And also, obviously, you mentioned you'd love to share it with the UFC. Obviously, John Jones would really benefit from gloves like that. Are you still open to sharing that glove around with other organizations in MMA?
Well, two questions. One, we just put out a release on that not long ago, and we have not had, to date, in this full season, one handbrake since we transferred to this new Everlast glove. And we had 8. I believe it's 8. I may get the 2 seasons confused, but the prior season we either had 8 or 9, and the season before that we either had 9 or 8. And I don't remember which season was which. But the decrease in the number of broken hands and the decrease in the number of eye pokes has been absolutely astronomical. This glove is spectacular in terms of fighter safety, and nothing knocks guys out of fights more often and in terms of being able to come back and fight again soon, or fight again in 3, 4, 5, or 6 months, than handbrakes. And this glove, over the last season at least, has eliminated that. It is some of the more shocking and great technology that I've ever seen in a combat sports piece of equipment. And Everlast worked with some of our team in the design process, made alterations and tweaks. Everlast has produced the glove. It is an amazing, amazing piece of equipment. Now, it's not a training glove. It's a legitimate 4-ounce mixed martial arts fighting glove for professionals. But I'll tell you, it's a piece of equipment that we should get into the hands of every and any fighter who's fighting professionally anywhere, because it literally protects their hands. It's a spectacular new piece of equipment. And
that's a fantastic move, in the sport of MMA in general, because obviously no one likes hand injuries. As far as the fan questions go, Bjorn, Hot Rhythm wants to know, are you guys going to be adding a women's division anytime soon?
That's a great question. I get that one all the time. We had a women's division. We had a great women's division. We had Jessica Aguilar, who was #1 in the world at 15. We had Megumi Fujii, who preceded Jag at 115 as the best in the world, #1. We had Jessica Evil Eye, who, when she was with us, was #1 in the world at 125. We were in the women's MMA business, and obviously the UFC is in the Ronda Rousey business. And we were trying to build up that aspect of the game, not around one singular woman to put on the cover of magazines and to promote and just keep feeding opponents to, but the entirety of the game. It wasn't working for us because of the numbers weren't there to support it, and the depth wasn't there. So in answer to the question, and I've got an amazing amount of respect for Jessica Aguilar, for Jessica Eye, for Megumi, for a lot of these women who fought with us and performed at a very high level for us. But from a business perspective, it just didn't return on investment. It just didn't work. So we're out of it for now. Does that mean we'll never get back into it? No, but for the time being, our focus is on the men's game. But I say that, I always try to caveat it and say I've got incredible respect for the ladies who do it. There are some wickedly talented women out there fighting. They should get more coverage. But it's not an area of the business that we're in right now, or we're going to be in for the foreseeable future.
I'm just seeing a women's tournament in my head right now, and I think it's something really exciting that Bellator could do in the future. But definitely, yeah, it's great that you're keeping the doors open. Now, the Brown Ranger, and that's a funny name right there, all in itself, would like to know, how do you think your champions would do against some of the UFC's top fighters?
Well, look, I never get into the business of saying we want to do this versus that or this versus that, because we're focused on our business. I think Eduardo Dantas can beat anyone in the world. I think Pat Curran for 14 or 15 months was ranked number 2 in the world. Then he had the setback against Strauss and then beat Strauss in the rematch to recapture the world title. I'll take my chances on Pat Curran versus anybody. I'll take my chances on Daniel Strauss versus anybody on earth, including Jose Aldo or anyone else. Ed, Mike, Will at 55. I put them in against any 355ers on the face of the earth. Given that GSP is not in the space right now, and given that there are a lot of different 70-pounders out there, but if you look across the expanse of MMA, at 70, they're mostly strikers. They're reliant upon their striking. They rely on their striking. That's where you see the strength in the welterweight division right now across the full expanse of MMA. I think Doug Lima beats anybody on earth. If you're standing up inside of a cage and you're 170 pounds, I'll put my money on Doug Lima putting you to sleep. I know that Shlemenko just had a tough run at 85 at fighting as a 205er, but as an 85er, I think he's one of the best on earth. Rampage, Newton, I love both of those guys against anybody at 205. John Jones is obviously a complete freak, and I got wild respect for John in terms of what he can do. It's just, look, I think Minikoff is an amazingly talented heavyweight. Volkov, while looking like a professional basketball player for the San Antonio Spurs, is actually a wickedly talented heavyweight as well. His defensive jiu-jitsu is great. His wrestling is very good for a Russian fighter. For any fighter who's not an American raised in Iowa, his wrestling is actually very good. And his striking I'll put his striking in against anybody in the world. So I like our chances against anyone on earth, and I think that's what gave us the opportunity to keep this pay-per-view in play. That's what's given us consistently improved and higher ratings all the time, is that people are looking at it and saying to themselves, they have got some amazingly talented fighters who can compete with anybody in the world. So I like our chances against anybody.
Now, another fan question, Bjorn Nighthawk68, he wants to know, in terms of the uniforms that could be possibly employed in the UFC, what are your thoughts on this? And will Bellator be following suit and having uniforms of their own?
Now, I've always felt like that we have a platform, and our platform allows us as a company to make money on television licensing fees, international television licensing fees, sponsorship, venue fees, ticket sales, merchandising. I've always felt like fighters from a sponsorship perspective should be able to reap as much financial benefit out of that as they can. I've never employed a sponsor tax, nor will I ever employ a sponsor tax. No sponsor on earth is ever going to have to pay us money to pay a fighter money. You can pay a fighter money directly. We don't expect to get any part of that vig. We don't expect to get a percentage. We don't expect to get a take on that. We don't charge you to pay our fighters a sponsorship to be in our cage, nor will we exclude you from being on one of our fighters in the cage. And I think the uniform comes into that. I think let the fighters wear what the fighters want to wear. Let them get their own apparel deals. Let them benefit 100% from that apparel deal. I think uniforms work great in baseball. Uniforms work great in Australian rules football and in American football and in basketball and hockey. Mixed martial arts combat is a completely different thing. It's an individual sport. Express yourself individually. You don't need to all walk in a specific uniform. Wear what you want to wear, dress how you want to dress, represent who you want to represent, and keep the money from that to yourself. And I've always felt that way. So there's no conceivable option right now I see for us implementing a uniform policy the way that the UFC has talked about it.
Now, Bjorn, to finish things off, to round things out, we have a bonus round we call the Submission Radio Tap Out Round. GQ Magazine rates it the top 5 tap out rounds worldwide, so we're happy to be ranked. It's not like the UFC ranking. It means a little bit more here. What we're going to do is we're going to ask you a bunch of questions, and it's like a word association. You just give us the first thing that comes into your head. So when you're ready, we're going to kick it off.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, now when you look at Bellator now and when it all started, you have to pinch yourself sometimes to see to look at the progress and everything that you guys have done.
I pinch myself sometimes, but it is getting closer to what I had visioned in my head.
Okay, now your dad is obviously the famous Winnebago man and known as the angriest man in the world. If there was a documentary on your life, what would the title be?
The most pleasantly relentless man in the world.
What does Bjorn Rebney like to do to relax?
I love to go to sushi and movies with my incredibly beautiful, charming, intelligent wife.
Good answer. If you could sign one fighter who's now retired in their prime to fight in Bellator, who would it be?
Probably Hickson Gracie.
Are drugs a problem in MMA?
Yes.
Do fighters get to choose their own entrance music, or does it depend on a wide range of factors?
Fighters at Bellator get to choose whatever entrance music they want, no matter how bad or good it is.
With the popularity of the EA UFC game, when can we see a Bellator game come out on the next-gen system?
Actually working on some options on a Bellator game now, but we're probably still at least a year to a year and a half out.
Can we have the hot exclusive on who you think you're going with in developing the game?
Well, we've actually talked to 3 different developers and some different producers as well, and so that there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, as you guys know. But it's in today's day of age, it's almost like producing a feature film. So it's a bigger project than many people realize.
Okay, now other than the fans, who wins in a ring card girl competition, Ariane or Jade Bryce?
Jade Bryce.
Have you done any grappling or boxing before? And let the fans know, how good are you?
I've done a good deal of grappling, a fair amount of stand-up. I've got adequate stand-up. I've got real good top control. I'm not spectacular off my back, but I can hold my own. I've rolled with a lot of our guys. I got the pleasure. I travel with some of the greatest fighters in the world, and they're always willing to roll with me just to humor me. I'm 48 years old, so that I'm not quite as explosive or powerful or agile or flexible as I used to be, but I'm all right. I can hold my own.
Awesome. Now, what's a typical day like for Bjorn Rebney?
Boy, I'm up at about 6. I'm usually into the office by about 7:15. I spend a lot of time responding to emails. I usually have anywhere from 10 to 12 calls set on my calendar and 2 to 3 meetings. They're crowded days. There's a lot of parts to this puzzle between talking with international television partners, working with the production team and the operations team, working with our partners at Spike and Viacom, working with sponsors, working with venue partners, talking to fighters, working through dynamics with fighters. There are as many different pieces to a Bjorn Rebney day as you could possibly conceptualize, because I've still, all these years in, I've still got my hands in every aspect of the business.
Now, the day is about to get a lot more interesting with this question. Now, if you had a movie based on your life, who would play you, your wife, and obviously the UFC would be in the movie in some respect, and who would be playing Dana White?
Wow. For me, just in my dream scenario, probably Jason Statham.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He would have to eat a lot more and put on a lot of weight and get rid of those wicked abs, or I'd have to go get into a crazy shape that I haven't been in about 5 to 10 years. My wife would probably play herself, because she's as much of an original as there has ever been, and so I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess as to who could play my wife. And Dana, I don't know. He's quite a character. He could probably play himself.
Maybe Michael Chiklis. That's what I was thinking. Michael Chiklis from The Shield.
And just for the record, Rich Franklin, Salma Hayek, he said would play his wife. So just to put that on the record as well.
And one of the last questions: when is Bellator coming to Australia, Bjorn?
Oh, I would love to come to Australia. First thing we've got to do is really secure a spectacular television alliance. I mean, look, the way you set the table for doing live events is you have very highly rated television programming in market that precedes your live event experience by a couple years. So I think that's the first step in the equation, is to get the real platform down and to really start generating numbers. We've done that in South America now, and we're going to be transitioning there. We've done that in Russia, and we've got our eyes on the prize in terms of getting there. But I would love to come down to Australia. That of all the great places on earth that I've been, and I've been almost everywhere, Australia is one of the places I've never been to, and it's really one of the places that's lacking. My nephews, my sister, brother-in-laws all go to Australia every summer, and I've never been, and it's like the one missing link in my incredible places around the world that I've been to.
Come on down, Bjorn. We'll get you some Vegemite and a VB. And obviously another issue, we've got to get it legalized here in Victoria, because that's just ridiculous. But guys, you can catch Bjorn Rebney on Twitter at Bjorn Rebney. And of course, you can watch Bellator live through our buddies at MMA Canvas. And you can catch older episodes on the 10 affiliated Channel 1 in Australia. Bjorn, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. It's been an eye-opening experience.
Well, it's been awesome talking to you guys. Let's talk again soon, all right?
Absolutely. You're welcome anytime. Thanks so much, Bjorn.
You got it.